The winter of 1878 brought a cruel wind to the Colorado Territory, the kind that carried both snow and desperation across the plains. Katherine Jones clutched her threadbare shawl closer as she stared at the golden locket in her palm, the last gift from her mother before consumption took her 3 months prior. The weight of it seemed heavier today as she stood outside Maddox's general store, her stomach cramping with 3 days of hunger. "Please, Mr. Maddox," Katherine said, her voice barely rising above the howling wind. She extended her trembling hand, the locket catching what little sunlight penetrated the gray afternoon. "It's pure gold. My father gave it to my mother on their wedding day." Elijah Maddox squinted at the piece, his weathered face betraying no emotion as he turned the locket over between his thick fingers. The shop owner's reputation for driving hard bargains was well known throughout Silver Creek. "Ain't worth much," he muttered, though the gleam in his eyes told a different story. "Could maybe spare half a loaf for it." "Half?" Katherine's blue eyes widened in disbelief. "Sir, please, I haven't eaten in days." "Times are hard, miss. Take it or leave it." Maddox placed the locket on the counter between them, already reaching for his bread box. Katherine felt hot tears threatening to spill. The locket contained the only image she had of her mother, a tiny portrait painstakingly painted by a traveling artist years ago. But hunger was a demanding master, and she had no other option since her mother's death had left her alone in their small homestead outside of town. "I'll take it," she whispered, the words like shards of glass in her throat. As Maddox reached for the locket, a gloved hand came down over hers, warm and steady. "That won't be necessary, miss." Katherine turned to find herself looking up at a tall stranger. His face was partially obscured by a well-worn hat, but she could see kind eyes beneath its brim. Dust covered his long coat, marking him as a traveler. "This ain't your business, Irving," Maddox growled. "It is now." The stranger gently closed Katherine's fingers around the locket. "The lady will have a full loaf of bread, some cheese, and whatever meat you've got that's fresh." "Put it on my account." Katherine stared at the man in shock. "Sir, I cannot accept Preston Irving," he said softly, tipping his hat. "And you most certainly can." Maddox scowled but moved to gather the items. The reputation of Preston Irving preceded him, even here a rancher with property south of town, who occasionally drove cattle up to Denver. A fair man, they said, but not one to cross. Preston guided Katherine to a small table by the store's potbelly stove. "Eat," he encouraged, placing the food before her. "Slowly, mind you. Too much too fast after going hungry will make you sick." Katherine hesitated only a moment before breaking off a small piece of bread. "Thank you, Mr. Irving. I'm Katherine Jones." "Miss Jones." He nodded respectfully. "May I ask what brings you to such desperate straits?" Between careful bites, Katherine told him about her mother's illness, the doctor's bills, and the failed crops that had left her destitute. "The homestead is mine, but without seed for planting or money for supplies." She trailed off, embarrassment coloring her cheeks. "And your father, killed at Antietam." "I was just a child." Preston nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Miss Jones, I have a proposition for you. My sister runs my household, and she's been looking for help with cooking and keeping the place. It would provide you with room, board, and a fair wage." Katherine's pride wanted to refuse, but practicality won out. "You would offer employment to a stranger, Mr. Irving." "A woman willing to trade her most precious possession for a loaf of bread rather than steal has character I can trust," he said simply. "Besides, my sister will be the one to decide if you stay beyond a week's trial." 2 days later, Katherine found herself riding beside Preston in his wagon, heading toward his ranch 15 miles south of Silver Creek. The journey gave her time to observe her benefactor more carefully. Preston Irving was perhaps 30 years of age, with brown hair that curled slightly at his collar and a strong jawline partially hidden by a neat beard. His hands were calloused from work, but he handled the reins with a gentle touch that spoke of consideration. "It's not much to look at," Preston said as they crested a hill, revealing a sprawling ranch below. A two-story house stood at its center, surrounded by several outbuildings, corrals, and pastures where cattle grazed. "But it's home. It's beautiful," Katherine breathed and meant it. After months of struggle and isolation, the sight of a thriving homestead stirred something within her. Hope, perhaps. The wagon had barely stopped when the front door flew open and a woman emerged, waving enthusiastically. "Preston, you're back early." Her gaze fell on Katherine, curiosity evident in her expression. "Maggie, this is Miss Katherine Jones. Miss Jones, my sister Margaret." Margaret Irving was a small woman with the same kind eyes as her brother and an infectious smile. "Oh, the help you mentioned in your letter. Come in, come in. You must be exhausted from the journey." Katherine found herself ushered into a warm kitchen where the smell of fresh bread reminded her of happier times. Margaret chatted amiably, explaining the household routines while Preston unloaded Katherine's meager belongings. "My brother wrote that you'd fallen on hard times," Margaret said, her voice softening. "I'm so sorry about your mother." Katherine clutched the locket around her neck. "Thank you. She taught me everything I know about keeping a home. I hope to be useful here." "I have no doubt," Margaret smiled. Preston is an excellent judge of character. In the days that followed, Katherine found her place within the Irving household. She rose before dawn to help prepare breakfast for the ranch hands, learned the rhythm of Margaret's efficient housekeeping, and gradually added her own touches to the routine. Her experience managing her parents' homestead proved valuable, and Margaret soon treated her more as a friend than an employee. Preston, however, remained something of a mystery. He was unfailingly polite, thanking her for meals and inquiring after her comfort, but he spent most daylight hours working with his men. Katherine often watched from the kitchen window as he rode out at dawn, his straight posture and confident handling of his horse creating an impressive figure against the rising sun. One evening, 3 weeks after her arrival, Katherine found Preston alone on the porch, smoking a pipe and staring at the stars. "Forgive me," she said, turning to go back inside. "I didn't mean to intrude." "No intrusion," he replied, standing. "Please join me if you'd like." Katherine hesitated before settling into the chair beside him. They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, the spring night cool but pleasant. "The ranch is doing well," she ventured finally. "You must be proud." Preston nodded, tapping his pipe against the railing. "It wasn't always. When our parents died 6 years ago, we nearly lost everything. Bad investments, drought, cattle thieves seemed like the world was determined to take this place. Yet you persevered. Had to. This land is all Maggie and I have left of them." His voice held no self-pity, just simple fact. "What about you, Miss Jones? Will you return to your homestead eventually?" Katherine sighed, fingering her locket. "I don't know. There are memories there, but also hardship. Mother always said home is where you can breathe freely." She looked across the darkened ranch. "I've breathed more easily here than I have in months." Preston studied her profile in the moonlight, something shifting in his expression. "I'm glad to hear it." Summer arrived with its relentless heat and the constant work of maintaining a working ranch. Katherine had fully integrated into the household, earning the respect of the ranch hands with her cooking and Margaret's affection with her companionship. She had put on weight, her once gaunt face filling out to reveal a natural beauty that had been hidden by hunger and grief. Preston noticed. Katherine would sometimes catch him watching her as she hung laundry or kneaded bread, his gaze quickly averted when discovered. For her part, Katherine found her thoughts drifting to him with increasing frequency, wondering about his day, anticipating his return in the evenings, treasuring the rare moments when work didn't pull him away immediately after meals. On a particularly scorching July afternoon, Katherine was alone in the house, Margaret having gone to visit a sick friend in town. A commotion in the yard drew her attention. Preston had returned early with an injury. She rushed outside to find him being helped from his horse, blood seeping through his shirt. "What happened?" she demanded, fear making her voice sharp. "Barbed wire," one of the hands explained. "Boss caught it across the chest when his horse spooked at a rattler." "Get him inside," Katherine ordered, already moving to prepare hot water and bandages. Her mother had taught her basic medical care, a necessity in remote homesteads where doctors were scarce. Preston's expression was tight with pain, but he managed a rueful smile as they eased him onto a kitchen chair. "Sorry to interrupt your afternoon, Miss Jones." "Hush," she scolded gently, cutting away his shirt to reveal 3 ugly gashes across his chest. "These need cleaning before infection sets in." The ranch hands excused themselves to tend the horses, leaving Katherine alone with Preston. She worked methodically, washing away dirt and blood, trying to ignore the intimacy of touching his bare skin or how his muscles tensed beneath her fingers. "You have gentle hands," Preston murmured, watching her face as she concentrated on her task. Katherine felt heat rise to her cheeks. "My mother nursed many injuries over the years. She believed kindness healed as much as medicine. She was right." His eyes didn't leave her face. "Katherine." It was the first time he had used her given name, and something in his tone made her pause, looking up to find his gaze intent upon her. "Yes." But whatever he might have said was interrupted by hoofbeats in the yard announcing the return of the other ranch hands. The moment dissolved, and Katherine busied herself with finishing the bandaging. That night, Katherine lay awake, replaying the moment in the kitchen, wondering what Preston might have said if they hadn't been interrupted. The way he had looked at her stirred feelings she hadn't expected to experience again, not since Thomas, her childhood sweetheart, had left for California 2 years earlier, promising to send for her but never doing so. A soft knock at her door startled her from these thoughts. She rose, wrapping a shawl around her nightgown before opening the door a crack. Preston stood in the hallway, looking uncertain. "I apologize for disturbing you so late," he said quietly. "I couldn't sleep. The pain." He gestured vaguely toward his bandaged chest. "Oh. Let me get you some willow bark tea." Katherine moved to step past him, but his hand on her arm stopped her. "That's not why I came," he admitted. "I wanted to thank you properly and to finish what I started to say earlier." Katherine's heart quickened. "Which was?" "That I've grown to care for you, Katherine, more than is probably proper, given that I'm your employer." His eyes searched hers in the dim light of the hallway lantern. "If that makes you uncomfortable, I'll never mention it again." "It doesn't make me uncomfortable," she whispered, scarcely believing her own boldness. "I've grown to care for you as well." Relief and joy transformed his features. "May I call on you properly then, not as your employer but as a man courting a woman he admires?" Katherine smiled, happiness bubbling up inside her like a spring. "I would like that very much." Autumn painted the Colorado landscape in brilliant colors, and with it came changes to Katherine's position at the Irving Ranch. No longer an employee, she had moved into town, taking a small room above the milliner's shop and working there during the day. Preston called on her regularly, taking her on proper outings, church socials, town dances, and long rides across the countryside. Margaret had been delighted by the development, confiding to Catherine that she had suspected her brother's feelings since midsummer. "He lights up when you enter a room," she said with a conspiratorial smile. "I haven't seen him this happy since before our parents died." On a crisp October evening, Preston took Catherine to their favorite spot, a small rise overlooking the ranch, where the sunset painted the sky in spectacular fashion. They had spread a blanket on the ground and shared a simple picnic of bread, cheese, and apples. "I've been thinking about your homestead," Preston said as they watched the sun sink toward the horizon. "The land is good, just neglected." Catherine nodded. She had visited once since coming to Silver Creek, finding the small cabin and fields overgrown but still intact. It would take considerable work to make it productive again. "What if we combined our efforts?" Preston turned to face her, taking her hands in his. "Catherine, I'm asking if you would consider becoming my wife. We could incorporate your land into the ranch, build a proper house there for us." Catherine's breath caught. Though their courtship had progressed naturally toward this moment, hearing the actual proposal made her heart soar. "Preston, I know it hasn't been that long," he continued nervously, "but I've never been more certain of anything. I love you, Katherine Jones. I think I began falling for you the moment you were willing to sacrifice your mother's locket for a loaf of bread." Catherine's fingers went to the locket that still hung around her neck. "That day changed everything for me," she whispered. "You didn't just feed me, Preston. You gave me hope when I had none left." She leaned forward, placing her hand against his cheek. "Yes, I would be honored to become your wife." Their wedding took place on Christmas Eve in Silver Creek's small church, decorated with pine boughs and candles for the holiday. Margaret had helped Catherine sew a simple but elegant dress of cream-colored wool, and the town had turned out in force to witness the union of the respected rancher and the young woman whose courage had captured his heart. As Preston slipped a gold band onto her finger, Catherine thought of how far she had come from that desperate day outside Maddox's store. The locket still hung around her neck, now joined by her wedding ring, two symbols of love spanning generations. "I love you, Mrs. Irving," Preston whispered as they shared their first kiss as husband and wife. Spring 1879 found Catherine standing on the porch of their new home, built on the site of her parents' homestead but 3 times the size. Preston had insisted on incorporating lumber from the original cabin into the fireplace mantel. "So your parents will always be part of our home," he had explained, bringing tears to her eyes. The ranch had prospered over the winter. Preston's careful management and Catherine's practical input, creating a partnership that extended beyond their personal relationship. They had expanded their cattle operation and planted wheat in the fields that had lain fallow during Catherine's mother's illness. "Admiring your kingdom?" Preston asked, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. Catherine leaned back against his chest. "Our kingdom," she corrected, covering his hands with hers. "I received a letter from the doctor in Denver today." "Oh," Preston's voice held a question. Catherine turned in his arms, her face glowing with happiness. "He confirmed what I suspected. We're going to have a child, Preston." In late autumn, joy transformed his features as he lifted her and spun her around the porch. "A child, Catherine, you've made me the happiest man in Colorado territory." Later that evening, as they sat by the fire, Catherine opened her locket, showing Preston the tiny portrait of her mother inside. "She would have loved you," she said softly, "and she would have been so excited about becoming a grandmother." Preston kissed her temple. "We'll tell our child all about her, how brave she was, how she taught you to be strong and resourceful, how her locket brought us together." "It wasn't just the locket," Catherine replied, curling into his side. "It was hunger and desperation, yes, but also your kindness. You saw someone in need and offered help without expectation." Best decision I ever made, Preston murmured against her hair. Summer passed in a blur of ranch work and preparations for the baby. Catherine's belly grew round beneath her aprons, and Preston became increasingly protective, hiring extra hands so she wouldn't overexert herself. Margaret visited often, bringing baby clothes she had sewn and advice gleaned from her friends with children. One hot August afternoon, Katherine was arranging wildflowers in the kitchen when the sound of approaching riders caught her attention. Looking out the window, she saw Preston returning with the ranch hands and another man she didn't recognize. Something in their posture alert, where he made her heart skip. Preston entered the house, his expression grave. "Katherine, this is Marshal Lewis from Denver. He's tracking a gang that's been robbing homesteads south of here." The marshal removed his hat, nodding respectfully. "Madam, sorry to bring trouble to your doorstep, but you should know there's danger about. 3 men hit the Johnson place yesterday, took everything of value, and left the family tied up." Catherine's hand went instinctively to her belly. "How close?" "About 20 miles south," Preston answered, crossing to stand beside her. "The marshal thinks they're working their way north." "We've got men watching the main trails," Lewis explained, "but they seem to know the backcountry well. Just want folks to be vigilant." After the marshal left, Preston gathered the ranch hands, organizing them into watches. "No one rides alone," he instructed. "Katherine is not to be left at the house unprotected." That night, as they prepared for bed, Katherine noticed Preston checking his rifle and pistol. "Do you really think they'll come here?" she asked. Preston's face was solemn in the lamplight. "Probably not, but I won't take chances with your safety or our child's." He set the weapons within easy reach. "I've asked 2 of the men to sleep in the bunkhouse instead of the line shack tonight, just to have more hands close by." Katherine crossed the room to him, placing her hands on his tense shoulders. "We'll be fine. This land has weathered worse than a few desperate men." He covered her hands with his. "You're right. Still, humor me with my precautions." 3 days passed without incident, the rhythm of ranch life continuing despite the undercurrent of vigilance. Preston relaxed somewhat, though Katherine noticed he still kept his pistol on his belt even when working close to the house. On the 4th morning, Katherine was alone briefly while Preston checked cattle in the nearest pasture, just within sight of the house. She was kneading bread dough when a noise on the back porch startled her. Expecting one of the ranch hands, she wiped her hands on her apron and opened the door. The man standing there was a stranger, unshaven, dirty, with cold eyes that assessed her and the house beyond in one quick glance. Before Katherine could react, he pushed past her into the kitchen. "Well now," he drawled, noticing her pregnant condition, "looks like we found ourselves a real family home." He called over his shoulder, "Boys, in here." 2 more men entered, equally rough-looking and armed. Katherine backed away, her mind racing. Preston was too far to hear a shout, and the ranch hands were scattered across the property. "Please," she said, keeping her voice steady, "take what you want and go. I won't cause trouble." The first man, clearly the leader, chuckled. "Smart woman. Where's your husband keep his money? And jewelry?" His eyes landed on her mother's locket. "Like that pretty piece there." Katherine's hand went protectively to her throat. "We don't keep much cash in the house. There's a strongbox in the study with about $40. "Show me," the leader ordered, grabbing her arm. Katherine led him to Preston's small office while the other men began ransacking the main rooms. The strongbox was unlocked, a fact she didn't mention, and contained exactly what she'd said. The man seemed disappointed. "This ain't enough." "Where's the real stash? A spread this size must turn a profit." "My husband banks in Denver," Katherine explained truthfully. "He doesn't trust keeping large sums here." The leader's face darkened. "Then we'll just have to take whatever else we can find." His eyes fell again on her locket. "Starting with that." Catherine's fingers closed around the gold pendant. "Please, it was my mother's. It has no real value except to me. Let me be the judge of that." He held out his hand expectantly. With shaking fingers, Catherine removed the locket, the same one she had nearly traded for bread over a year ago. As she reluctantly extended it toward the outlaw, a shot rang out from outside the house. The leader cursed, grabbing the locket and shoving Catherine roughly aside as he drew his gun. "That'll be your husband, I reckon. Came back sooner than we expected." More shots followed, and the sound of men shouting. The outlaws in the main room were firing through the windows. Catherine's heart pounded with fear for Preston. The leader dragged her back to the kitchen. "You're coming with us. Insurance-like." He pulled her toward the back door just as it burst open. Preston stood in the doorway, his face a mask of fury, pistol aimed steadily at the outlaw. "Let her go. Now." "Drop your gun or I'll hurt her," the leader threatened, pulling Catherine against him as a shield. Catherine met Preston's eyes, seeing both rage and fear in their depths. Slowly, deliberately, she stomped her heel down on her captor's foot while simultaneously driving her elbow into his ribs with all her strength. The moment his grip loosened, Preston fired. The outlaw dropped to the floor, clutching his shoulder and cursing. In the main room, the shooting had stopped. Catherine could hear the ranch hands calling that they had the other two men subdued. Preston crossed the room in 2 strides, pulling Catherine into his arms. "Are you hurt? The baby?" "We're fine," she assured him, trembling with the aftermath of fear and relief. "They didn't harm me." The injured outlaw groaned from the floor. "Bitch took my gold." Catherine looked down to see her mother's locket had fallen during the struggle. She carefully retrieved it, the familiar weight comforting in her palm. "Not yours to take," she said quietly. 2 days later, Marshal Lewis returned with deputies to collect the outlaws, who were being held in the Silver Creek jail. The town had buzzed with the news of how the Irving Ranch had captured the notorious Stillwell gang, with particular emphasis on Catherine's role in the leader's capture. "You were incredibly brave," Preston said that evening as they sat on their porch, watching the sunset. "And incredibly foolish. He could have killed you both." Catherine rested her head against his shoulder. "I knew you wouldn't let that happen." Preston's arm tightened around her. "When I rode back and saw strange horses at our house, when I heard the shots." His voice broke slightly. "I've never been so terrified." "But you came for me," Catherine said simply. "Just as you did that first day in Maddox's store." Preston smiled, his hand coming to rest on her rounded belly. "Always. Though I hope our child inherits a bit less of your tendency to find trouble." "And I hope our child inherits your generosity," she countered. "The world needs more people willing to press gold lockets back into desperate palms." In late October, Catherine gave birth to a healthy daughter they named Elizabeth Margaret Irving. Preston paced the hallway throughout the long labor, rushing to Catherine's side the moment the midwife allowed him entry. "She's perfect," he whispered, cradling his daughter with wonder while Catherine watched with exhausted joy. "She has your eyes." "And your stubbornness," the midwife commented wryly. Taking her time but then arriving in quite a hurry once she made up her mind. As winter settled over the ranch, bringing with it the quiet season of shorter days and longer nights, the Irving family established new routines around the baby's needs. Preston proved to be a devoted father, often holding Elizabeth while Catherine prepared meals or took much-needed rest. On Christmas morning, exactly 1 year after their wedding, Preston presented Catherine with a small box. Inside was a delicate chain bearing a new locket, this one silver, engraved with their initials. "To match your mother's," he explained as she examined it with delight. "Open it." Inside was a tiny portrait of Elizabeth on one side and Preston on the other, painted by an artist Preston had secretly commissioned from Denver. "It's beautiful," Katherine breathed, tears welling in her eyes. "I thought perhaps someday, generations from now, our daughter's daughter might treasure it as you treasure your mother's," Preston said, fastening it around her neck to hang alongside the original gold locket. Katherine touched both pendants, symbols of the past and future hanging together against her heart. "Our story began with a locket and a loaf of bread," she mused. "Who could have imagined where it would lead?" Preston kissed her gently. "I knew that day that you were special, Katherine. A woman of character and courage. And I knew you were a good man," she replied, smiling up at him as Elizabeth stirred in her cradle. "Perhaps not that you would become my husband and the father of my child, but I knew my life had changed the moment you pressed that locket back into my palm." As the years passed, the Irving ranch prospered and grew. Katherine and Preston welcomed 2 more children, a son named James and another daughter they called Hannah. The gold locket that had once nearly been traded for bread became a cherished family heirloom, its story told and retold to each new generation. And whenever anyone asked how the successful rancher and his wife had met, Preston would smile and say simply, "She tried to trade her mother's locket for bread. I pressed it back into her palm and fed her." And Katherine would add, "And in doing so, he fed my soul as well."